I delivered pizzas for about 2 years while I was in college, mostly to help cover rent, and for the most part, it was a pretty easy gig. You drive around, you hand people food, you collect your tips, and you go home. Most customers are completely normal. Once in a while you get someone rude, or someone who stiffed you on the tip, but 99% of deliveries are forgettable. The thing about the job that nobody really tells you though is that you end up going to a lot of strange places alone, late at night, with cash on you, and you don't think about how vulnerable that makes you until something actually happens. For me, that something happened on a Tuesday night during my second year doing it, and it's the reason I quit not long after. I worked at one of those chain pizza places in a mid-sized town. We stayed open until midnight on weeknights, and the last hour or two of a shift was always the worst, because that's when you'd get the orders from the sketchier parts of town, or from people who were clearly drunk. I'd learned to just keep my head down and get through it. This particular night it was close to 11, and I had one last delivery before I could clock out and go home. The order was a single large pizza going to an address on the very edge of town, in an area I wasn't familiar with. It was one of those neighborhoods where the houses get further and further apart the deeper you go, and the streetlights kind of just give out. My GPS took me down a long winding road, and the further I drove, the more isolated it got. The houses thinned out until there were these big gaps of nothing but trees between them. I remember thinking it was a strange place to be ordering a pizza from, just because it was so out of the way, but people live everywhere, so I didn't dwell on it. The address turned out to be the very last house on a dead-end road. There were no other houses within sight of it. The place itself was dark except for a single light on somewhere in the back, and there were no cars in the driveway. My first thought was that maybe I had the wrong house, because it genuinely looked like nobody was home, but the number on the mailbox matched the order, so I grabbed the pizza, walked up to the front door, and knocked. It took a while for anyone to answer, long enough that I almost gave up and went back to my car. But eventually I heard footsteps inside, and the door opened. The guy who answered was probably in his 40s, tall, kind of heavyset, and he was wearing a stained undershirt and sweatpants. The first thing I noticed was that he didn't really look like he'd been expecting food. He looked disheveled and out of it, and he just stared at me for a second, like he was surprised to see me, even though he'd ordered. I gave him my usual greeting and told him the total. He nodded and said, yeah, and then he told me his wallet was in the back bedroom and asked if I could just step inside for a second while he went and grabbed it. Now, normally when someone needs to get their wallet, they tell you to hold on, and they leave the door open while they go get it, and you wait on the porch. That's just how it works. So the fact that he specifically asked me to come inside immediately struck me as odd. I told him it was fine, I'd just wait right there at the door. He kind of paused, and then said the cash was all the way in the back, and it'd be easier if I came in and waited in the living room. I said again that I was okay waiting outside. That's when his demeanor changed a little. He got this slightly annoyed look, and he said something like, "It's cold out, just come in for a second." And he stepped back and pulled the door open wider, gesturing for me to come inside. I want to explain something about that moment. There was nothing overtly threatening about what he was saying. On paper, it just sounds like a guy being hospitable, but every single instinct in my body was telling me not to go into that house. The way he was looking at me, the isolation of the place, the fact that he kept pushing it after I'd already said no twice. While he had the door open, I could see into the living room behind him, and it was almost completely empty. There was no furniture, no TV, nothing. Just a bare room with a couple of folding chairs in it. For a guy who supposedly lived there and ordered a pizza, the place looked like nobody actually lived in it. That was the detail that really set me off. I made a quick decision. I told him that store policy didn't allow us to enter customers' homes, which wasn't really true, but it was the first thing I could think of. I set the pizza down on the little ledge by the door and told him he could just leave the cash there or call the store to pay. Then I started backing toward my car. He stepped out onto the porch after me and said in a much flatter tone, "You're not gonna wait?" I just kept saying it was fine, and that I had other deliveries, even though it was my last one. I got into my car as quickly as I could without full-on running, locked the doors, and pulled out of that driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see him still standing on the porch, watching me drive away. He didn't pick up the pizza, he just stood there. When I got back to the store, I told my manager what happened, mostly because I'd left without collecting payment, and I wanted to cover myself. My manager's reaction is what really stuck with me. He went kind of quiet and then asked me to show him the address on the order. When I did, he told me that we'd actually had a problem with that exact address before. He said another driver, a girl who'd worked there before me, had gone out to that house a few months earlier and had a similar experience, a guy trying to get her to come inside, and that she'd been so shaken she quit on the spot. He said after that, the owner had quietly flagged the address, but somehow it had gone through on my order anyway. He apologized for sending sending me out there. We ended up calling the non-emergency police line, more because my manager insisted than anything. They sent someone to check on the house, but I never heard much about what came of it. A week or so later, I asked my manager if he'd found anything out, and he just said the police had told him the house was a rental that had supposedly been vacant. Which didn't make any sense because I'd looked a grown man dead in the eye on that porch. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, and I've spent a lot of time trying not to think too hard about what would have happened if I'd walked into that empty house to wait in the living room. I quit delivering not long after. To this day, if I'm dropping food off somewhere and someone asks me to come inside, I won't do it. I don't care how rude it seems. A couple of summers ago, I was between jobs and pretty desperate for money, so I signed up to deliver food through one of those apps where you use your own car. It seemed like easy money, and the flexibility was nice because I could work whenever I wanted. For the first few weeks, it was totally fine. I delivered a lot of food, made decent tips, and never had a single problem. I'll admit I wasn't very cautious about it. I'd drive anywhere the app sent me, at any hour, without really thinking about my safety. I was a woman in my mid-20s driving alone late at night to strangers' houses, and I just didn't think anything bad would ever happen to me. I know how naive that sounds now. This happened on a Friday night, which was usually my most profitable time to work because everyone's ordering food. It was around 10:30 and I'd been grinding out deliveries all evening. I got an order for a pretty big amount, 2 pizzas plus sides, and drinks, going to an address in a part of town I didn't know well. It was a newer area, one of those neighborhoods that was still being developed, where there were a lot of half-built houses and empty lots mixed in with the finished ones. The payout on the order was good, and the customer had pre-tipped well, so I was happy to take it. I picked up the food and headed over. The drive should have been my first warning. As I got closer, the streetlights became fewer, and the houses became less finished. By the time my GPS told me I'd arrived, I was on a street where maybe half the lots were just wooden frames with no walls, and the rest were empty dirt. I remember the whole street was dead silent. There were no other cars, no lights on in any of the few completed houses, nothing. Just me and rows of half-built homes and stacks of building materials sitting in the dark. The address I was looking for turned out to be one of the unfinished ones. It was a house that had been framed out and had a roof, but it had no windows, no doors, no anything. It was just a skeleton of a house, completely dark, with construction supplies piled around it. There was obviously nobody living there. There couldn't be. I sat in my car for a minute, confused, thinking maybe I'd plugged the address in wrong, but the app clearly showed this as the drop-off location. My first instinct was to just mark it as undeliverable and leave, but the order was a big one, and if I didn't complete it, I'd lose the payout and probably get a complaint. So I did what the app tells you to do in that situation, which is contact the customer. I sent a message saying I'd arrived, but the address appeared to be an empty construction site and asked where exactly they wanted the food. Almost immediately, I got a response. It said, "Yeah, we're in the back. The front isn't finished. Just come around the side of the house and we're in the back. Thanks." I remember reading that and feeling my stomach drop. There was no back of the house. It was an empty frame on an empty lot. There was nothing back there but darkness and more construction. And the idea of walking around the side of a pitch black unfinished house at night, away from the street and away from my car, to deliver pizza to people who supposedly lived in a building with no walls, was insane. Everything about it was wrong. I texted back something like, "I'm not comfortable doing that. I can leave the food at the front or cancel the order." The response came fast and the tone had changed. It just said, "Just bring it to the back. We're waiting." That word, waiting, is what made the hair on my arms stand straight up. I put my car in reverse and started to leave. And the second I did, 2 figures came out from behind the unfinished house. They were too far away and it was too dark for me to see them clearly, but I could tell they were men and they were moving fast, walking quickly toward my car from the exact side of the house where they'd told me to go. They had been back there the whole time, waiting in the dark, in the precise spot they'd been trying to get me to walk to. If I had gotten out of my car and gone around that house, I would have walked right into them, away from the road, where no one would have seen a thing. I didn't wait around to find out what they wanted. I slammed on the gas and got out of there as fast as my car would go, nearly clipping a stack of lumber on my way out of the lot. In my mirror, I could see them stop in the middle of the street, just standing there watching me drive away, not even trying to chase the car. They didn't need to chase me. Their whole plan had depended on me walking to them willingly, and the moment that didn't happen, they just let me go. That's the part that still scares me the most. It was so calm and calculated. They'd placed a large order, pre-tipped generously to make it attractive, and picked a location specifically designed to isolate whoever showed up. When I got home, I was shaking so badly I had to sit in my car in my own driveway for a while before I could even go inside. I reported it through the app, and the company's response was basically useless. Some automated message about how they take safety seriously. I also called the police and gave them the address. The officer I spoke to actually took it pretty seriously and said they'd had a couple of reports of drivers being lured to vacant addresses in that area, and that I should be glad I trusted my gut. He told me these kinds of setups were specifically designed to target delivery drivers because they know we'll show up alone at night to whatever address we're given without questioning it. I stopped using that app the very next day, and I never went back to that kind of work. I never found out who those men were or what they intended to do. And honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that for the price of a couple of pizzas, they almost got me to walk straight into them. I've been delivering pizza on and off for almost 15 years now. It's not a glamorous job, but it's honest work, and I've actually grown to like it. Over that many years, you see a lot of things. You see people at their best and their worst. You see the insides of more homes than you can count. And after a while, almost nothing surprises you anymore. I've been tipped in nothing but loose change. I've had people answer the door completely naked. I've walked up to houses with cops already standing outside. You name it, I've probably seen some version of it. But there's one delivery I made a few years ago that I have never been able to shake, and it's the only one that still keeps me up at night. It was a normal weeknight, nothing special about it. Around 9 o'clock, I got an order for a couple of pizzas going to a house in a quiet residential neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing ever happens. Nice houses, manicured lawns, the whole deal. It was the type of delivery I'd done 1,000 times, and the type of neighborhood where I never had any concerns whatsoever. I pulled up to the house, grabbed the food, and walked up to the door like always. When I knocked, it took a moment, and then the door opened just part way, maybe a foot. A man stood in the gap. He was probably in his 30s, well-dressed, normal-looking guy. But the second I saw him, I could tell something was wrong. He was sweating, not a little, but visibly sweating, with his hair damp against his forehead, even though it was a cool night and I could feel air conditioning pouring out from inside. And he was breathing kind of heavy, like he'd been exerting himself. He didn't open the door all the way. He kept his body wedged in the gap, blocking my view of the inside, and he kept glancing back over his shoulder into the house, the whole time I was standing there. I told him his total, and he fumbled around in his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. Here's the thing that really stuck with me. The total was something like $35, and he handed me what had to be over $100, didn't even count it, and told me to keep the change. Then he reached out to take the pizzas from me, and as he did, the door swung open a little wider for just a second, and I got a clear look past him into the house. In the hallway behind him, maybe 20 feet back, there was a woman. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and she wasn't moving. Her knees were pulled up and her arms were behind her back at an unnatural angle, like her hands might have been tied or being held there. She was looking right at me. I'll never forget the look on her face as long as I live. It wasn't just fear. It was like she was silently pleading with me, her eyes wide, and for half a second we just locked eyes. Then the man noticed I was looking past him and he quickly pulled the door almost shut, took the pizzas through the gap, said thanks in this tight, strained voice, and shut the door the rest of the way in my face. I stood on that porch for a second completely frozen, not sure if I'd really just seen what I thought I saw. Part of my brain was already trying to explain it away. Maybe she was just sitting on the floor. Maybe I imagined the way her arms were positioned. Maybe they just had an argument. People are weird and you see weird things on this job and you learn pretty quickly not to insert yourself into other people's business. But the over-tipping, the sweating, the way he kept his body jammed in the door, the way she looked at me, it all added up to something I couldn't explain away, no matter how hard I tried. I got back in my car and pulled away, but I only made it a couple of blocks before I had to stop. I just couldn't shake the image of that woman's face. I sat there in my car arguing with myself. If I called the police and it turned out to be nothing, I'd feel like an idiot and they might not even take me seriously. But if I didn't call and something was actually wrong, I knew I would never forgive myself for the rest of my life. In the end, it wasn't really a hard decision. I called 911 and told the dispatcher everything I'd seen, gave them the address and described the man. They told me they'd send units to check it out. I offered to wait nearby and the dispatcher told me it was fine to go, that an officer might follow up with me later. I didn't go far. I parked at a gas station a few minutes away and just sat there, hoping I'd done the right thing. About 15 minutes later, I saw 2 police cars race past in the direction of the house. No sirens, but moving fast. I never got a call that night, and I went home not knowing what had happened, barely able to sleep at all. I tried to follow up over the next few days, but couldn't get any real information out of anyone. Then about a week later, I was watching the local news, and a story came on that made my blood run cold. It was about a woman who had been reported missing by her family and had been found safe after police responded to a tip at a residence. They didn't release a lot of details, and they didn't say a single word about a pizza delivery, but the neighborhood they mentioned and the timeline lined up exactly with my delivery. A man had been taken into custody. I have no way of knowing for certain that it was connected to what I saw. The news never confirmed it, and I never spoke to the police again. But in my gut, I know. I know what I saw in that hallway, and I know what that woman's face was telling me. I think about her sometimes, and I hope she's doing okay, wherever she is. Out of all the thousands of deliveries I've made over the years, that's the one I'll carry with me forever. It's the reason I always pay attention now, every single time a door opens.